Hi, it's Scott again, a photo media instructor at Lake Area Technical Institute, Watertown, South Dakota. And this is not a tutorial so much as an overview of a process having to do with Apple Aperture. I tell my students that it's an important thing to try to get everything right in camera. And I believe in that. I believe that if you can get exposure and composition and things like that right up front, white balance, if you can get all of that right in camera, you won't have to play with that in software. But I believe that photography is not just taking the picture. Even back in the days of film, it wasn't that they just took the picture, it was also what they did with the picture in the post-processing, in the darkroom. Our darkroom as digital photographers is no longer a dark room, but instead our dark rooms are things like Aperture and Lightroom by Adobe and Adobe Photoshop. And the more I learn about Aperture, the more amazed I am by what it can do. Now, I want to talk a little bit about a photo that I took about 5 years ago. And this happens to be in the Pantheon in Rome. This was a building that was built about 2 millennia ago. It was one of the first domed buildings that was built out of cast concrete. In fact, it was the first cast dome that was ever built. The Romans were amazing engineers, and this is an amazing building with all kinds of interesting detail. I think that this photo is fundamentally pretty good in terms of its composition. I like the lines. I like the straight lines here that take the eye from the corner. I like the curves. I like the curves that lead up to the hole in the dome, which is called the oculus. And of course, that's the very brightest part of the picture, which is where the eye wants to go. I don't mind, frankly, that there's a little bit of highlight on these columns either, because it kind of helps balance the picture. Now, incidentally, in terms of exposure, this is pretty good. If I turn on the highlight warning, the only thing that's overexposed is the oculus, which is inevitable. This picture is well focused, kind of remarkable, frankly, because if you look at the exposure details, it was shot at ISO 640 at f4 at 1/30th of a second, and it was handheld. That's the virtue of a good lens that is image stabilized. I was shooting this with my 24 to 105 4.0 L lens. But I wanted to show you that this is the before picture. All of the other details about this picture are revealed here. The histogram shows that it's a picture that lacks a little bit of contrast, and I would say that's true. This one spike over here is the oculus, the white eye. There's nothing that's totally black in this picture according to the histogram. Even the very darkest parts of the picture are not totally black. So the exposure is good. I got lucky. Actually, I took about 40 photos in this structure, so maybe I'm lucky to get one good one. But that's the before picture. Now, this is a raw image, which is to say that the camera isn't doing a lot to in the camera software. The camera isn't doing a lot to this photo. Raw images say let the photographer do it after the photo is taken in the software. And so that's the before, and that's the after. Now, maybe that is a subtle difference, but there is a whole lot that's going on in the before and after here. And I just want to point out a few of the specific things. I take the loop and put it over these amazing Corinthian columns here. And I'm just going to show you the before and then the after. Now, what I've done here is that I've applied sharpening to the columns. I've also done that elsewhere where there is carved detail. There's the before, and there's the after. And then finally, one other before and after that has to do with detail right here. There's the before, and there's the after. Now, that's sharpening that's been applied, but there have been a whole lot of other things that have been applied as well. In fact, from this picture to that picture required a multitude of different things that were done in Aperture. And this is one of the remarkable things about Aperture, is that if I were doing this in Photoshop, every different color here would have been a separate layer and would have required a layer mask. And just to give you some sense of what the color codes mean, everything that's green here was burned in, which is to say that I used a tool to darken parts of the photo. I darkened that. Everything that's red here had a contrast brush applied, but I used two different contrast brushes because I wanted to apply a stronger brush there since there is less contrast in that part of the dome, and some contrast here, but not quite as much, and I feathered the difference between the two. That is in blue here actually had some saturation that was brushed in. I wanted it to be just a little bit more colorful. And up here in this tiny little triangle, I applied two different brushes. I actually applied a dodge tool, which lightened it a little bit. And I also applied a noise brush so that I could take some of the noise out. One of the problems that you have with underexposed areas of photos that are shot at high ISO is that when you try to bring them to light, you start to get some fairly ugly noise. I'm going to go back a step here. There's the before. And actually, why not take a look at this area? Now, I have to tell you that this is not real pretty in the after, but at least you can see it. And frankly, it's not a big part of the total picture. And there's the after. Like I say, it is a little bit ugly, but you can see something there that you couldn't see before. In fact, if you step back to ground level or camera level, take a look at that triangle, you can see that I bring a little bit of detail into that. So anyway, that's the overview of the steps that it took. Now, by the way, this retouching on this photo probably took me about a half an hour, and I used a pen tablet, which is almost necessary when you're doing this kind of work. This is a quote that I've come across, and I believe it very strongly, and it is that the countless unseen details are often the only difference between the mediocre and the magnificent. I'm not suggesting that my photo is magnificent. I would say that the Pantheon certainly is, and that the details in the Pantheon are what make it magnificent. I would say that most people wouldn't necessarily see the difference between the before and after. But there is a difference, and in the totality of the photo, whether it's displayed online or whether it's made into a print, is what people will see. And we want that to be as close to magnificent as we can possibly make it. And the software and our eyes are what help us get there. Thanks for listening.